50 years of marriage ended with a single sentence that erased an entire lifetime. As Evelyn Carter sat in the attorney's office surrounded by her late husband's adult children, she watched them smile while everything she believed she had built slipped away. They inherited the mansion, the fortune, and the family name. She received only a rusty iron key and the address of a forgotten house no one wanted. She walked away believing she had lost everything, without realizing that someone had spent decades hiding the only gift that truly mattered. Welcome to today's story. If you enjoy emotional drama and shocking twists, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. And before we begin, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. 3 weeks earlier, nothing had prepared Evelyn Carter for how quickly a lifetime could unravel. She had been 72 years old, and for nearly half a century, she had lived inside the stately brick mansion that overlooked a quiet street in Brookline, Massachusetts. Every room carried traces of her hands, every polished table, blooming flower bed, and carefully folded linen reflected years of quiet devotion. To visitors, the house belonged to Charles Carter, one of Boston's most respected attorneys. To Evelyn, it had simply been home. Charles had been older than she was, admired by judges, business leaders, and politicians alike. He carried himself with calm authority, spoke little, and rarely displayed emotion in public. Yet behind closed doors he had never been cruel. He thanked Evelyn for every meal. He never raised his voice. Every anniversary, he quietly left fresh white roses on the breakfast table before she woke. They were small gestures, never dramatic, never enough to explain the distance that always remained between them. There were parts of Charles's life she was never invited into. His private office stayed locked. His financial records remained unseen, and once every month, sometimes for an entire weekend, he disappeared. "I need a little peace away from the city," he always said with an apologetic smile. She never questioned him. Trust had become a habit stronger than curiosity. His 3 adult children had never shared that trust. Daniel, the oldest, believed Evelyn had married their father for security. Vanessa wore perfect manners like jewelry, but every compliment she offered carried invisible thorns. Eric rarely spoke at all. He simply followed his older brother's lead, allowing silence to become agreement. Over the years, Evelyn continued trying. She remembered birthdays. She prepared elaborate holiday dinners. She kept guest rooms ready, even though they were rarely used. She sent thoughtful anniversary gifts after each of their marriages. Nothing softened their opinion of her. To them, she remained the woman who had entered their father's life late and somehow occupied a place they believed belonged only to blood. Charles saw the tension. Sometimes he squeezed Evelyn's hand beneath the dinner table when conversations turned cold. Sometimes, after everyone left, he would quietly say, "Thank you for making today easier than it could have been." She always smiled back. That was enough, or at least she believed it was. One autumn afternoon, only a few weeks before everything changed, Evelyn was planting late-season roses beside the stone walkway when she noticed Charles standing near the porch. He wasn't reading legal papers. He wasn't answering phone calls. He was simply watching her. When she looked up and laughed because soils had smeared across her gardening gloves, he smiled in a way she had almost forgotten. Warm, peaceful, almost boyish, she waved. He lifted a small camera. A quiet click echoed across the garden. "You took my picture," she asked. "I wanted to remember this moment," he replied. "For what reason?" Charles looked toward the roses instead of answering immediately. "Because happiness disappears faster than we expect." She teased him for sounding sentimental. He only smiled and slipped the camera back into his jacket. It became one more small mystery among many. The following Tuesday morning, Evelyn carried his coffee upstairs, exactly as she had done thousands of times before. The bedroom curtains were still closed. The house remained silent. She placed the tray on the nightstand and gently called his name. He never answered. The doctors later said his passing had been peaceful. A massive heart attack, instant, no suffering. The funeral drew hundreds. Former clients, judges, business partners, old friends. Everyone spoke about Charles Carter's brilliant legal mind, his discipline, his reputation, his influence. No one spoke about the woman who had quietly stood beside him for 50 years. Evelyn noticed something else. Daniel had arranged the seating. She wasn't placed beside the immediate family. Instead, she sat one row behind them. No explanation was offered, none was needed. The message landed with painful clarity. She had spent 50 years inside the family without ever truly belonging to it. After the service, while guests filled crystal glasses and exchanged polite condolences, Evelyn stood alone near the garden terrace. She overheard Vanessa speaking softly to several family friends. "We'll finally be able to settle father's estate," Vanessa said. "It's time everything goes where it always should have." Someone asked, and Evelyn? Vanessa offered a sympathetic smile that never reached her eyes. "I'm sure father made appropriate arrangements." Evelyn looked toward Charles's portrait displayed near the entrance. For the first time in 50 years, she wondered whether she had truly known the man she loved. 7 days later, dressed in black, carrying nothing but a leather handbag and quiet hope, she stepped into the downtown law office where Charles's final wishes would be read. Across the conference table, Daniel slowly adjusted his expensive watch. Vanessa opened a leather notebook with calm confidence, and Eric leaned back in his chair wearing the faint smile of someone already celebrating a victory that had not yet been announced. Marcus Whitmore, Charles Carter's long-term estate attorney, waited until everyone had taken their seats before opening the thick leather portfolio resting on the conference table. His silver hair was perfectly combed, but his expression lacked its usual confidence. He glanced toward Evelyn only once, and in that brief moment, she noticed something she had never seen on his face before. Regret. Daniel sat closest to the head of the table, his tailored navy suit fitting him as precisely as his certainty. Vanessa crossed one elegant leg over the other, already holding a fountain pen as if she expected to sign documents before lunch. Eric leaned back with folded arms, saying nothing, watching everything. Marcus cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming. As you know, Mr. Charles Carter updated portions of his estate plan approximately 18 months before his passing. Today's meeting concerns the final distribution of assets according to his last valid will." Daniel nodded confidently. "We're ready." Marcus began with routine formalities: Charles's legal capacity, witness signatures, probate filings already submitted. Everything had been prepared carefully, exactly as one would expect from a man who had practiced estate law for nearly 5 decades. Evelyn barely listened. She wasn't thinking about numbers. She wasn't wondering how much money Charles had accumulated. She simply wanted reassurance. 50 years together had to mean something. Surely Charles had made certain she would never face old age alone. Marcus turned another page. The estate is currently valued at approximately $9 million, including the Brookline residence, investment portfolios, retirement holdings, commercial interests, and several additional real estate properties. Daniel smiled. Vanessa quietly exhaled. Eric finally sat forward. Evelyn's shoulders relaxed without realizing it. Charles had always planned ahead. Of course he had, Marcus continued. The Brookline residence shall pass equally to Daniel Carter, Vanessa Carter Ellis, and Eric Carter. Daniel's smile widened. The investment portfolio shall be divided equally among the same beneficiaries. Vanessa wrote something in her notebook. The retirement accounts shall likewise transfer according to the same distribution. The room suddenly felt colder. Evelyn frowned. Perhaps Marcus simply hadn't reached her portion yet. She folded her hands together to stop their slight trembling. Marcus looked directly at her. His voice became quieter. "There is one remaining personal bequest." Evelyn forced herself to smile. "There you are," she whispered. Marcus hesitated long enough for everyone to notice. "I am required to read this exactly as written." He removed a separate document. "My beloved wife, Evelyn Carter, has enjoyed 50 years of comfort, stability, and financial security through our marriage. She has benefited from my home, my reputation, my resources, and a standard of living beyond anything she would have known otherwise." Each sentence landed harder than the one before it. Marcus continued anyway. "I believe those years provided fair and sufficient recognition for the companionship and household devotion she generously offered throughout our marriage." The words echoed through the silent conference room. Household devotion, companionship, not wife, not partner, not love. Evelyn felt something collapse inside her. Across the table, Daniel slowly lowered his eyes, hiding what looked suspiciously like satisfaction. Vanessa made no effort to hide hers. Eric stared at the polished wood table without expression. Marcus swallowed before reading the final section. Therefore, I leave to Evelyn Carter one property located at 14 Willow Creek Road, Ashcroft, Massachusetts, together with all structures and contents currently existing on said property. He paused. My wife shall vacate the Brookline residence within 30 calendar days following my death. Silence. Complete silence. Evelyn blinked several times. I'm sorry, she finally whispered. I don't understand. Marcus slowly removed his glasses. I'm afraid that's the complete instruction. What about this house? It belongs to the 3 beneficiaries. The savings? They are distributed according to the will. My retirement. There is no separate retirement account in your name. She looked around the room. No one spoke. She searched each familiar face for confusion, for sympathy, for someone willing to say there had been a mistake. There was nothing. Daniel finally leaned forward. Father always believed family assets should remain with the Carter bloodline. The sentence cut deeper than shouting ever could. Evelyn stared at him. I was your father's wife. You were, Daniel answered evenly. And he made sure you were comfortable for 50 years. Marcus's jaw tightened. Daniel, I'm only repeating what father believed. Vanessa closed her notebook. The property in Ashcroft shouldn't be difficult for you. Father mentioned it years ago. An old country house inherited from some distant relative. She shrugged. I doubt it's worth very much, but at least you won't be homeless, at least. The phrase echoed painfully. 50 years reduced to at least. Marcus slid a brown envelope across the table. His hand lingered on it for a moment before letting go. This belongs to you. Inside lay an old iron key darkened with age. Beneath it rested a folded property deed and one sealed handwritten note. Daniel immediately stood. We'll arrange for the estate manager to coordinate your move. Marcus interrupted. Mrs. Carter has 30 full days, of course, Daniel replied politely. We respect father's wishes, respect. The word almost made Evelyn laugh. Instead, she reached for the envelope. Her fingers shook. She carefully unfolded the single page. Charles's familiar handwriting stared back at her. My dearest Evelyn, I know what today must feel like. Please don't judge everything by what you've just heard. Take the key. Go to Willow Creek Road as soon as you can. Trust me one last time. Everything you truly need is waiting there. With all my love, Charles. Her eyes remained fixed on the final 3 words. With all my love. Nothing matched the cruel language of the will, the tenderness of the note. They could not both belong to the same man. Marcus quietly leaned closer. So much of this doesn't appear to make sense, he said softly enough that only she could hear. Please, before you make any conclusions, visit that property. She looked up. You knew? I knew only what I was legally allowed to know. Then tell me whether my husband loved me. Marcus closed his portfolio slowly. I can tell you this. His voice barely rose above a whisper. Charles Carter planned every sentence of that will himself. The answer offered no comfort at all. Evelyn slipped the note back into the envelope, stood without another word, and walked toward the conference room door. Behind her, Daniel was already discussing appraisals. Vanessa was talking about renovations. Eric asked whether they should sell the house before winter. No one tried to stop her. No one asked if she was all right. As the elevator doors closed, Evelyn looked down once more at the old iron key resting in her palm. It was worn smooth as though someone had used it countless times over many years. One side of the key carried something she hadn't noticed before. Tiny engraved letters, not an address, not a serial number, just 2 simple words, Sanctuary House. Evelyn stood in the parking garage long after the elevator doors had closed behind her. The envelope rested against her chest, and the old iron key felt strangely heavy in her hand. She traced the tiny engraved words again. Sanctuary House. Charles had never called anything by that name. Not their mansion, not his office, not any vacation property she had ever heard him mention. She slipped the key back into the envelope and took a slow breath before walking to her aging silver sedan. It suddenly looked very small beside the luxury vehicles parked around it, many of them belonging to attorneys who had spent years admiring Charles Carter. She wondered how many of them had known pieces of his life that had never been shared with his own wife. The drive home passed in silence. She turned off the radio after only a few minutes. Even soft music felt intrusive. Every traffic light gave her another chance to replay the words from the will. Companionship, household devotion, fair compensation. They sounded less like a husband's farewell and more like language lifted from an employment contract. By the time she pulled into the driveway, 3 expensive SUVs were already parked in front of the mansion. Daniel had not wasted a single hour. Inside, the familiar house no longer felt familiar. Voices echoed from the dining room. Someone laughed. Another person discussed flooring samples. Evelyn stepped inside carrying only her handbag and the brown envelope, and no one looked surprised to see her. A woman wearing a designer blazer approached Daniel with a folder. "If we're staging the property," she said, "I'd recommend opening the kitchen into the family room." Daniel nodded. "I was thinking the same thing." Evelyn stopped walking. The kitchen. She had spent decades cooking there. She had refinished every cabinet herself after Charles refused to replace solid oak with cheaper materials. She still remembered the smell of fresh varnish on her hands. Now strangers were discussing demolition while her coffee mug still sat beside the sink. Vanessa noticed her first. "Oh, Evelyn." Her smile appeared perfectly practiced. "We're just gathering ideas. Nothing is happening immediately." Evelyn looked around the room. 2 interior designers, a real estate agent, a contractor. None of them acknowledged her. She was standing inside the home she had cared for 50 years, yet she felt like an unexpected visitor. "The will gives me 30 days, she said quietly. Daniel answered without looking away from the contractor's blueprints. "And you'll have every one of them." His tone sounded reasonable, professional, almost kind. That somehow made it worse. She climbed the staircase slowly and closed the bedroom door behind her. Only then did she allow herself to cry. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just quiet tears falling onto folded hands that suddenly looked much older than they had that morning. After several minutes she wiped her face, opened the envelope again, and carefully unfolded Charles's handwritten note. She read it 5 times. The handwriting was unmistakably his. The words were gentle. Nothing resembled the cold legal language Marcus had been forced to read aloud. "Trust me one last time." She looked toward Charles's empty side of the bed. "For what?" she whispered. "What am I supposed to trust?" There was no answer, only silence. That evening the mansion filled with more unfamiliar voices. Daniel was discussing market conditions in the library. Vanessa was arranging appraisals for artwork. Eric met with an accountant in Charles's study. The room Evelyn had respected for 50 years. The room she had entered only when invited. Now its door stood open while strangers carried boxes in and out. She remained downstairs. Around sunset she walked quietly into the back garden. The roses had begun fading with autumn. She knelt beside the same flower bed where Charles had photographed her only weeks before. Her gardening gloves still hung on a small wooden hook inside the potting shed. She picked them up. One glove still carried dried soil along the fingertips. A memory returned unexpectedly. Charles standing on the porch, the camera, his strange answer. Happiness disappears faster than we expect. At the time it had sounded sentimental. Now it sounded like preparation. Had he known? Had he already written the will? Had he already decided she would someday leave this garden forever? The thought made her chest tighten. She stood and slowly walked toward the stone bench near the fountain. Something caught her eye, a tiny glimmer beneath the bench. She bent carefully and reached underneath. It was a brass camera lens cap, old, weathered, the same brand Charles had always used. She smiled despite herself. He had probably dropped it while photographing the roses. Without thinking, she slipped the cap into her pocket. It felt like the only piece of him that still belonged to her. The next morning began even earlier than usual. Movers arrived before 8. They weren't removing Evelyn's belongings. They were measuring furniture, tagging artwork, taking inventory. One man politely asked her to step aside so he could photograph the fireplace. She moved without argument, not because she agreed. Because she suddenly realized arguing with strangers would only rob her of the dignity she still possessed. After breakfast, she made her first decision since Charles died. She would not spend 30 days waiting to be erased. She carried 3 empty storage boxes upstairs and began packing only what truly mattered. Family photographs taken before her marriage, letters from old friends, a quilt stitched decades ago by a college roommate, Charles's handwritten anniversary cards, the camera lens cap. Everything else stayed on the shelves. As she packed, she opened the nightstand drawer on Charles's side of the bed for what she believed would be the last time. Most of it contained ordinary things: reading glasses, prescription receipts, a flashlight, loose change. Near the back lay a small leather notebook. Her heart skipped. She had never seen it before. Inside were only a handful of pages. Most contained dates, driving mileage, weather notes, nothing meaningful, until the final page. Written in Charles's neat handwriting were 12 entries, one for nearly every month. Each ended with exactly the same 2 words. Visited sanctuary, nothing more. No address, no explanation. Only one final entry stood apart from the rest, dated just 6 weeks before his death. Visited sanctuary, everything is finally ready. She stared at the sentence until the words blurred. If everything had been ready, then Charles had been planning something for a very long time. And somehow he had never intended for anyone else to know. Evelyn sat on the edge of the bed, long after sunset, the small leather notebook resting in her lap. She read the final entry again, slowly, tracing each word with the tip of her finger. Everything is finally ready. Charles had never written carelessly. Every sentence he put on paper had purpose. If he believed something was ready, then he had spent years making sure it would be. For the first time since his funeral, Evelyn stopped asking herself whether Charles had loved her. Instead, she began asking a different question. What had he been protecting? The next morning, she made another decision. She would not wait until the 30th day. She wanted answers before she left the mansion forever. After breakfast, while Daniel met another realtor downstairs, Evelyn quietly drove back to Marcus Whitmore's office. Marcus looked genuinely surprised when his assistant announced her arrival. "Evelyn," he said as he stood, "I wasn't expecting you, I know." She remained standing instead of taking the chair across from his desk. "I only have 2 questions." Marcus waited. "Did Charles visit that property often?" The attorney hesitated. "I can't discuss private conversations with a deceased client." She nodded slowly. "I thought you'd say that." She reached into her purse and placed the leather notebook on his desk. Marcus looked at the final page. His expression changed almost instantly. "You've seen this. I found it yesterday." Silence settled between them. Finally, Marcus closed the notebook. "I still can't disclose confidential advice," he said carefully. "But I can tell you something that isn't confidential." Evelyn leaned forward. Charles never missed a single scheduled visit. Her heart skipped. For how long? Marcus gave the smallest smile. "Longer than I've known him, so, decades?" He didn't answer directly. "I strongly recommend you go there before making any decisions about the property." "You keep saying that." "Because it's the only advice I'm allowed to give." She searched his face. Was he happy there? Marcus looked toward the office window before answering. "Happier than anywhere else." That answer stayed with her all the way back to Brookline. It wasn't proof. It wasn't an explanation, but it was the first honest thing anyone had told her since Charles died. When she arrived home, another unfamiliar truck sat in the driveway. Auction specialists. They were cataloging antiques. One employee had already attached numbered tags to several pieces of furniture: a mahogany dining table, an antique grandfather clock, 2 paintings Charles had inherited decades earlier. Everything looked as though the house had already stopped belonging to her. Daniel noticed her carrying another storage box. "You don't have to rush." His voice sounded almost friendly. "We're giving you the full month." Evelyn looked directly into his eyes. "I've decided to leave sooner." His eyebrows lifted. "I thought you'd appreciate that. I didn't do it for you." Without another word, she carried her box upstairs. That afternoon, she continued packing only the things that mattered. Most drawers contained ordinary household items: old receipts, stationery, Christmas cards, nothing unexpected. Until she opened the cabinet beneath the bookshelf in Charles's private study, she froze. The cabinet was empty, too empty, perfectly clean, almost recently cleaned. Dust covered every shelf in the room except that cabinet. Someone had removed something, recently, very recently. She stepped backward. The realization settled slowly. Charles had died only weeks earlier. Someone had entered this room after his death. Someone had known exactly where to look. She closed the cabinet without touching anything else. Then she walked downstairs. Eric stood alone in the kitchen making coffee. It was the first time she had found one of the 3 siblings without the others. He turned. "Oh, Evelyn." She studied him quietly. "You've been in Charles's study." His shoulders stiffened. "We've all been in there. Did you remove anything?" He frowned. "No." You didn't empty a cabinet. I don't even know which cabinet you're talking about. She watched his face carefully. Eric wasn't a skilled liar. He looked genuinely confused. Before she could ask another question, Daniel entered carrying paperwork. There you are. He glanced between them. Everything okay? Eric shrugged. Evelyn was asking about father's office. Daniel's expression changed almost imperceptibly, only for a second, but she saw it. The smallest hesitation, then it disappeared. We've been organizing documents, Daniel said smoothly. Anything important? Just tax records. I noticed one cabinet had been completely emptied. Daniel smiled. It probably held outdated client files. Marcus already collected whatever mattered. That explanation sounded reasonable. Almost too reasonable. Evelyn said nothing, but she remembered Marcus telling her he had not returned to the house after the funeral. Someone wasn't telling the truth. That evening she phoned Marcus again. I'm sorry to bother you. You aren't. Did you remove any files from Charles's study? A brief pause. No. Not even legal records? No. Another pause. Why are you asking? She looked toward the dark hallway leading to Charles's office. Because someone did. Marcus didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its usual calm. Lock your bedroom door tonight. The words chilled her. Marcus, I'll come by tomorrow morning. Tell me what's happening. I can't over the phone. The call ended. Evelyn stood motionless in the kitchen. Outside, rain had started falling against the windows. The old house creaked softly. For the first time in 50 years, it no longer felt safe. Unable to sleep, she walked quietly through the hallway shortly after midnight. A faint light glowed beneath Charles's study door. She stopped breathing. She had turned every light off herself before going upstairs. Someone was inside. Very slowly she stepped closer. She heard the unmistakable sound of paper being shuffled, then a drawer sliding open, another drawer closing. She reached the door and gently pressed her hand against the brass handle. Before she could turn it, the sound inside stopped completely. Silence. Absolute silence. Then, from the other side of the locked door, someone whispered only 3 words. She found it. Evelyn's hand froze on the brass doorknob. The whisper had been unmistakable. She found it. A man's voice, low, controlled, not frightened. Whoever stood inside Charles's study knew someone had discovered something, and they clearly weren't talking about the empty cabinet. Evelyn stepped backward without making another sound. Instead of opening the door, she quietly retreated down the hallway. Years of living beside a careful attorney had taught her one valuable lesson. People revealed more when they believed they had not been noticed. She slipped into the guest bedroom across the hall and left the door barely open. Less than a minute later, the study door clicked. Soft footsteps crossed the hardwood floor. A shadow moved through the dim hallway. Daniel. Even in the darkness, she recognized his posture. He paused outside Charles's bedroom, glanced toward the staircase, then continued downstairs carrying a slim black document case Evelyn had never seen before. Only after the front door closed did she return to the study. The desk drawers stood open. The banker's lamp had been moved slightly. Nothing appeared damaged, yet someone had searched the room with purpose. She walked directly to the empty cabinet beneath the bookshelf. It was still empty, but now something else caught her attention. A faint rectangular outline remained in the dust on the bottom shelf. Whatever had once been stored there had been about the size of a legal archive box. Someone hadn't been looking through papers. Someone had come for something very specific. Evelyn took out her phone and photographed the cabinet before touching anything else. It was the first piece of evidence she had deliberately preserved. Then she quietly locked the study door from the inside. She searched every shelf again, every drawer, every corner, nothing. Just as she prepared to leave, she noticed one book sitting slightly farther forward than the others. Charles had always aligned his books perfectly. She pulled it free. It wasn't a book at all. It was a hollow book safe. Inside rested only a folded yellow note, no signature, no date, one sentence. If this shelf is empty, they came too early. Evelyn stared at the words. They, plural. Charles had expected more than one person might search this room. She carefully slipped the note into her purse beside the leather notebook. Now she had 2 pieces of evidence that didn't fit the story anyone else believed. Marcus arrived shortly after 9 the following morning. He entered through the front door carrying only a leather briefcase. Daniel greeted him politely. Good morning, Marcus. I need to speak with Mrs. Carter privately. Daniel hesitated. Regarding probate? Regarding my client. Something in Marcus's voice ended the discussion. A few minutes later, they sat together inside the locked study. Evelyn placed the notebook, the yellow note, and the photographs of the empty cabinet on the desk. Marcus examined each item without speaking. When he reached the yellow note, his expression changed. You've never seen this before, Evelyn asked. No, but you recognize it. Marcus slowly nodded. The handwriting is Charles's. He looked toward the empty cabinet. Then someone definitely removed something. What was supposed to be there? Marcus remained silent. I know enough to be concerned. She folded her arms. I'm done being protected by half-truths. Marcus sighed. Charles instructed me not to discuss certain matters until after you visited Ashcroft. Why? Because he believed everything would make sense once you saw Sanctuary House. She leaned forward. Marcus, someone broke into this room. I know. I suspected they would. He removed a business card from his wallet. I want you to leave Brookline within 48 hours. She blinked. I still have weeks. I don't care. His calm professionalism had disappeared. Charles spent years planning for exactly this possibility. What possibility? Greed. Before she could ask another question, someone knocked firmly on the study door. Daniel, everything all right? Marcus answered before Evelyn could. Perfectly. We've scheduled another appraisal downstairs. We'll be finished shortly. The footsteps retreated. Marcus lowered his voice. Did Daniel know about the notebook? The note? Good. He placed both items back into her hands. Keep them with you at all times. What was inside that cabinet? Marcus met her eyes. I honestly don't know. She frowned. But Charles once told me. He stopped. What? That if anyone searched his study before you reached Sanctuary House, it would mean they feared something they couldn't control. Evelyn felt a chill travel through her body. Not because of what Marcus had said, because of what it implied. Daniel wasn't searching for money. He was searching for information. That afternoon, Evelyn packed faster than she had planned. Not because anyone forced her. Because she no longer wanted another night inside a house where people searched rooms after midnight. She filled 3 boxes with the only things she truly valued. Letters, personal photographs, the notebook, the yellow note, Charles's handwritten anniversary cards, the old camera lens cap. Finally, she placed the iron key inside a small velvet pouch and tucked it into her handbag. Just before dinner, she walked through the garden one last time. The roses swayed gently beneath an autumn breeze. She reached the stone bench where she had found the camera lens cap. This time she noticed something carved into the underside of the weathered seat. Not initials, coordinates, tiny, almost invisible beneath decades of dirt. She photographed them immediately. They weren't the Ashcroft of dress. They pointed somewhere else entirely. A location less than half a mile from Willow Creek Road, another place connected to Sanctuary House. As she slipped the phone back into her pocket, a black luxury SUV rolled slowly past the front gate. It didn't stop, it simply drove by once, then turned around at the end of the street and drove by again. The windows were too dark to see inside, but whoever occupied the vehicle wasn't looking at the mansion. They were watching Evelyn. Evelyn did not wave at the black SUV. She simply stood beside the stone bench until the vehicle disappeared around the corner for the second time. Only then did she walk calmly back toward the house, refusing to let anyone watching see fear on her face. Inside, Daniel was speaking with a moving coordinator in the foyer. We'll have access by next Friday, he said. Everything remaining can be donated. Remaining, the word stung. 50 years of a shared life had already become remaining property in his mind. Evelyn walked past him without stopping. Daniel. He looked up. I'll be leaving tomorrow morning. His expression brightened before he caught himself. So soon? Yes. I can have someone help you pack. No. She held his gaze. I'll take care of my own things. For a brief second, disappointment crossed his face. It vanished almost immediately. If that's what you want, it is. She continued upstairs, but now she noticed something she had overlooked before. Daniel was watching her handbag. Not her, the handbag. The one containing the key, the notebook, the yellow note, and Charles's letter. Marcus had been right. Whatever Daniel wanted, it wasn't the furniture. It wasn't the mansion. It was something Charles had left behind. That evening, Marcus called again. I've arranged something. What is it? A locksmith will meet you in Ashcroft tomorrow afternoon. I already have the key. I know. The front door? No. His answer came quickly. A different lock. Evelyn frowned. There are more locks? Marcus was quiet for several seconds. Charles believed one door should never be opened without first understanding the house. You're still speaking in riddles. I won't have to after tomorrow. Before ending the call, Marcus added one final sentence. If anyone follows you, don't drive directly to Willow Creek Road. Evelyn slept very little. Before sunrise, she loaded her silver sedan herself. 3 boxes, 2 suitcases, 1 garment bag, nothing else. Half a century reduced to what fit inside one ordinary car. She walked through each room only once. The living room where she had hosted endless dinner parties. The dining room where Charles had entertained judges and business leaders. The library lined with books she had dusted thousands of times. None of them felt like hers anymore. Only the garden slowed her steps. She touched one fading white rose. I'll miss you, she whispered. Not the mansion, not the wealth. The roses, those had always answered only to her. When she returned to the driveway, Daniel was already waiting. I wanted to say goodbye. She nodded politely. So did I. He hesitated. Father wasn't an easy man, no, but he believed he was doing what was right. Evelyn studied him carefully. Did he ever tell you about Sanctuary House? Daniel's face became perfectly still, just one heartbeat. Then he shook his head. I've never heard that name. She smiled faintly. It wasn't a smile of warmth. It was recognition. He was lying. She didn't challenge him. Instead, she opened the driver's door. I hope you find everything you're looking for. Daniel looked confused. What do you mean? I think you know. She closed the door before he could answer. In the rearview mirror, she watched him remain standing in the driveway long after she pulled away. Not waving, watching, the highway west felt strangely peaceful. Boston slowly disappeared behind her. Tall office buildings gave way to rolling hills. Traffic thinned. Her breathing became easier with every mile. She stopped once for coffee at a small roadside diner. An elderly waitress smiled warmly. Traveling? Starting over. The waitress poured fresh coffee without asking another question. Sometimes, she said quietly, that's the bravest trip. Evelyn carried those words with her when she returned to the road. Nearly 3 hours later, the GPS instructed her to exit toward Ashcroft. Unlike Brookline, the small town seemed untouched by urgency. A white church stood beside the town square. A family-owned hardware store occupied one corner. An old brick post office faced a bakery where fresh bread cooled in the window. People actually looked at one another instead of their phones. The slower rhythm unsettled her at first. Then, unexpectedly, it comforted her. She followed the GPS another mile until the paved road narrowed beneath towering oak trees. A wooden sign appeared beside the entrance, Willow Creek Road. Her heartbeat quickened. The trees grew older with every turn. Their branches formed a tunnel overhead, filtering late afternoon sunlight into shifting patterns across the windshield. Finally, the GPS announced her destination. She stopped the car. Ahead stood a stone house unlike anything she had imagined. Not abandoned, not collapsing, weathered certainly, but magnificent. Grey fieldstone walls, a slate roof, wide front porch, leaded glass windows reflecting the surrounding forest. Wild climbing roses covered one side of the house. Someone had cared for this place, recently. As Evelyn stepped from the car, the front door opened before she reached it. An elderly woman with silver hair and kind eyes descended the porch steps carrying a woven basket. You must be Evelyn. It wasn't a question. Evelyn, sorry, have we met? The woman smiled gently. No. She extended the basket. Fresh bread, eggs, coffee, a few groceries. Evelyn stared in confusion. How did you know I was coming? We've been expecting you. The words sent another chill through her. My name is Margaret Ellis. She glanced lovingly toward the old stone house. Charles asked me to watch over Sanctuary House until the day his wife finally came home. Evelyn's breath caught. You knew Charles? Margaret laughed softly. For almost 40 years, 40 years. The number struck Evelyn harder than anything else. 40 years. The same number written again and again inside the notebook. The same years Charles had quietly disappeared one weekend nearly every month. Margaret looked at Evelyn with unmistakable warmth. He talked about you every single time he came. Evelyn could barely speak. He brought me here? In stories. Margaret nodded toward the front porch, and before we go inside, She reached into the basket and removed a sealed cream-colored envelope. "I've been keeping this for years." Across the front, written in Charles Carter's unmistakable handwriting, were 5 simple words. "Open only upon arrival." Evelyn accepted the cream-colored envelope with both hands. The paper had yellowed slightly with age, but the wax seal remained unbroken. Charles had pressed the family signet into the dark red wax, just as he had done for every important private letter throughout their marriage. "He made me promise," Margaret said softly, "that no one else would ever touch it, not even me." Evelyn looked up. "How long have you been keeping this?" Margaret smiled with quiet sadness. "A very long time." She stepped back toward the porch. "You should read it inside." Evelyn nodded. For reasons she couldn't explain, opening the envelope on the front steps felt wrong. Whatever Charles had hidden here deserved privacy. Margaret unlocked the front door with a brass key hanging from a blue ribbon around her neck. "I've only been its caretaker," she explained. "From today forward, every key belongs to you." The heavy oak door swung inward. Evelyn stopped breathing. The house didn't smell abandoned, it smelled lived in. Fresh cedar coffee, old books. A fire had burned recently in the stone fireplace, leaving only faint warmth in the room. Nothing about Sanctuary House resembled the neglected property Vanessa had described. It was beautiful. Wide plank wooden floors stretched beneath handcrafted rugs. Sunlight filtered through stained glass windows, scattering soft colors across polished furniture that had clearly been maintained with care. Shelves filled with leather-bound books covered one wall, while framed landscapes and botanical sketches decorated another. It felt peaceful, not luxurious, loved. Margaret quietly placed the grocery basket in the kitchen. "He always wanted your first impression to be this room." "My first impression?" "He said this house wasn't supposed to impress you." She smiled. "It was supposed to welcome you." Evelyn felt tears threatening again. Charles had never spoken that way in Boston. There, every room had been designed to impress clients, judges, investors, and politicians. This house asked nothing from anyone. It simply invited them to rest. Margaret motioned toward a comfortable chair near the fireplace. "You should read the letter." Evelyn carefully broke the seal. Inside were several handwritten pages. The first line alone nearly shattered her. "My dearest Evelyn, if you are reading this, then you finally reached the only place where I was ever completely honest." She closed her eyes. Not because the words hurt, because they healed something she hadn't realized was dying. She continued reading. Charles admitted he had hidden Sanctuary House from everyone, including her. Not because he doubted her, but because he never trusted the greed surrounding his public life. He explained that every monthly trip had been spent restoring the old property, preparing it quietly for the day she might need a life untouched by conflict. Then came something unexpected. "You probably believe I abandoned you in my will." Her fingers tightened around the paper. "I expected you would hate me for a while. If that happens, you have every right." A tear landed on the page. "But hatred is easier to survive than watching them steal this place before you ever saw it." Evelyn stopped reading. She looked toward Margaret. "He knew I would think he betrayed me." Margaret nodded. "He worried about that every time he came." "He said that?" "He said losing your trust would be the greatest price he would ever pay." Silence settled between them. Not awkward, comfortable. Margaret waited while Evelyn gathered herself before reading again. The next page contained no legal language, only memories. Charles described mornings drinking coffee alone on the porch while imagining Evelyn beside him. He wrote about planting oak saplings that would someday provide shade for her walks. He confessed that nearly every photograph hanging in the house had been taken because he feared ordinary moments disappeared too quickly. Evelyn suddenly remembered the camera lens cap. She reached into her purse. Margaret laughed softly. "You found it. You knew?" "He searched for that cap for nearly 6 months. He never told me." "He couldn't." Margaret walked toward the hallway. "Come." They entered the living room. Evelyn froze. Photographs covered the walls, not formal portraits, not society events, real moments. Evelyn reading beneath a window. Evelyn trimming roses. Evelyn laughing while flour covered her apron. Evelyn asleep in a porch chair with sunlight resting across her face. Some had clearly been taken from a distance, others from only a few feet away. She had never known. Her knees weakened. "My goodness." Margaret stood quietly behind her. He developed every photograph himself in the workshop behind the house. He never showed me. He wanted these moments to stay untouched. Evelyn moved slowly from frame to frame. None had been posed, none had been performed. For the first time in days, she saw herself through Charles's eyes. Not as a hostess, not as someone serving dinner, not as the invisible woman described in the will. Simply beloved. Her attention stopped at one empty space on the wall. A brass hook remained, no photograph, only a faint square where one frame had once hung. She looked toward Margaret. What was here? Margaret frowned. It was here last month. What was it? I honestly don't know. When did you last see it? The week before Charles passed. She walked closer, studying the wall. I dusted around it. Evelyn's heartbeat quickened. Another missing item, first the cabinet, now a photograph. Neither disappearance felt accidental. Margaret's expression slowly changed. I just remembered something. What? The day after Charles's funeral, she hesitated. A man came here. Evelyn stared at her. He said he represented the family. Which family? He didn't say. What did he look like? Margaret thought carefully. Well-dressed, dark hair, expensive watch. He asked whether Charles had left anything behind. Evelyn's stomach tightened. What did you tell him? That everything belonged to you. And then, he walked through every room without asking permission. Margaret looked genuinely troubled now. I assumed Marcus had sent him. He hadn't. No. Margaret slowly shook her head. He stood exactly where you're standing now. She pointed toward the empty hook, and when I brought him coffee, her voice faltered. That photograph was gone. Evelyn instinctively reached into her purse and gripped the iron key. Someone had searched Charles's study. Someone had watched the mansion. And now she knew someone had entered Sanctuary House before she ever arrived. She turned back toward the wall one last time. Beneath the empty hook, almost hidden by the wood paneling, a tiny strip of white paper protruded from behind the molding. Very carefully she pulled it free. It wasn't a photograph. It was half of one. The torn edge was fresh. The remaining image showed Charles standing beside another person whose face had been deliberately ripped away. On the back, written in Charles's unmistakable handwriting, were 6 chilling words. He must never find this photo. Evelyn read the 6 words again. He must never find this photo. She turned the torn photograph over several times, hoping another clue might appear beneath the faded ink. There was nothing except Charles's unmistakable handwriting and the jagged edge where half the picture had been deliberately removed. Margaret stepped closer. I've never seen that note before. I believe you. Evelyn carefully slipped the photograph into a protective folder inside her handbag. If someone came here looking for this picture, they already knew it existed. Margaret nodded slowly, and they found most of it, which means they didn't find all of it. For the first time since arriving at Sanctuary House, Evelyn felt something stronger than grief. She felt purpose. Whoever had searched Charles's study, whoever had entered this house, had overlooked one small piece of evidence. She intended to find out why. Margaret led her into a bright kitchen overlooking the back meadow. Fresh coffee was already waiting on the old cast-iron stove. Charles always said difficult conversations deserved good coffee. Despite everything, Evelyn smiled. That sounds exactly like him. They sat near the window while afternoon light stretched across the wooden table. For several minutes, neither woman spoke. Finally, Margaret folded her hands. There are things I can tell you now. Evelyn looked up immediately. Please. Charles never lied when he came here. The sentence landed gently. In Boston, Margaret continued, he carried the weight of his reputation every minute of every day. Here, he stopped pretending. He spoke about me? Every visit. Margaret smiled warmly. He called you his piece. Evelyn lowered her eyes. Then why couldn't he simply tell me about this place? Margaret sighed. He tried once. Evelyn looked back up. What do you mean? It was years ago. Margaret searched her memory. He drove off here looking happier than I'd ever seen him. He told me he planned to bring you the following weekend. What happened? He received a phone call before leaving. Margaret's expression darkened. I don't know who called, but afterward he cancelled. And after that he never mentioned bringing you again. Evelyn remembered countless weekends Charles had suddenly changed plans because of urgent family matters. She had never questioned them. Now she wondered how many had been genuine emergencies and how many had been carefully manufactured interruptions. Margaret stood. Come with me. She opened the back door and led Evelyn along a narrow stone path that curved behind the house. The forest surrounded them with quiet. After several minutes, they reached a small workshop tucked beneath enormous oak trees. Its weathered sign simply read, "Photography Studio." Margaret unlocked the door. Inside, everything remained exactly as Charles had left it. Old cameras rested inside glass cabinets, shelves held labeled boxes of negatives, a developing sink occupied one corner. The room smelled faintly of photographic chemicals and cedar wood. He spent hours here. Margaret ran her fingers gently across the work table. He developed every picture himself. Evelyn slowly walked through the room. She found notebooks recording dates, camera settings, film types. Nothing seemed unusual. Then she noticed one filing cabinet. Unlike the others, it was locked. "The locksmith Marcus mentioned," she said quietly. Margaret nodded. "I assumed that's why he called." Just then Evelyn's phone vibrated. "Marcus," she answered immediately. "Have you arrived safely?" "Yes, I'm standing inside Charles's photography workshop." Silence. Then Marcus spoke carefully. "Is there a locked filing cabinet?" Her pulse quickened. "Yes." "Don't try forcing it. I wasn't planning to. The locksmith is 10 minutes away." "What am I about to find?" Another pause. "I honestly don't know exactly. But Charles specifically instructed me that cabinet must remain sealed until you arrived." "Why?" "Because whatever is inside belongs to your future." The call ended. Evelyn looked at the locked cabinet again. Another secret, another carefully timed step. Charles had layered his plans like a trial attorney building a case. Nothing happened too early. Nothing happened by accident. Outside, a pickup truck slowly approached the workshop. An older man climbed out carrying a metal toolbox. "You must be Mrs. Carter." He extended his hand. "Frank Willis, the locksmith." Within minutes he examined the antique lock. Beautiful workmanship. He smiled. "They don't build them like this anymore." He selected a key from a ring of blank templates. The cabinet opened with a soft metallic click. Neither Frank nor Margaret reached inside. Both stepped back respectfully. Evelyn pulled open the upper drawer. Instead of documents, she found dozens of carefully organized envelopes. Each carried a handwritten date. Each represented 1 month, nearly 40 years' worth. She opened the earliest envelope. Inside lay photographic negatives, contact sheets, and handwritten notes describing each image. Not legal records, not financial files. Charles had documented nearly every visit to Sanctuary House. Each envelope also contained 1 page of personal reflections, private thoughts he had never spoken aloud. Evelyn opened another, then another. The entries weren't dramatic, they were deeply human. "Today I planted another maple because Evelyn loves autumn colors. Today I found the perfect rocking chair for the porch. She'll pretend it's too old-fashioned, then she'll secretly love it. Today I almost brought her here. I lost my courage again." Her tears returned. Not because of money, because she was finally meeting the man Charles had never allowed himself to become. As she carefully returned the pages, one envelope caught her attention. Unlike the others, it wasn't dated. Across the front, Charles had written only one instruction: open only if someone else reached Sanctuary House before Evelyn. Her heartbeat accelerated. Margaret leaned closer. "I've never seen that envelope, neither had Marcus." Evelyn slowly opened it. Inside was a single folded sheet. She unfolded it carefully. Only one sentence appeared. "If you are reading this, someone has already stolen the photograph. The person you're looking for isn't searching for the picture itself. They're searching for what is hidden behind its frame." Evelyn stared at the page. Behind its frame, she looked instinctively toward the torn half of the photograph resting safely inside her handbag. Then she realized something that made her blood run cold. No one had been trying to steal a photograph. Someone had been dismantling its frame, because Charles had hidden something inside it. Evelyn read Charles's sentence twice before carefully folding the page and placing it back inside the envelope. Someone had searched his study. Someone had entered Sanctuary House. Someone had stolen a photograph. And now she knew why. They hadn't wanted the picture. They had wanted whatever Charles had hidden behind its frame. Margaret watched her quietly. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking Charles never left clues by accident." She reached into her handbag and removed the torn half of the photograph they had recovered from behind the wall. If the frame mattered, then this piece matters too. Margaret spread a soft linen cloth across the work table in the photography studio. Together, they examined the fragment under the afternoon light. The remaining image showed Charles standing beside a stone fence. Beyond him stretched part of the meadow behind Sanctuary House. The second person had been almost completely torn away. Only one hand remained. An older man's hand, not a woman's. A silver signet ring rested on the little finger. Evelyn frowned. "That isn't Charles's hand." Margaret leaned closer. "No, and I don't recognize the ring." She turned the photograph over. The back carried Charles's 6 handwritten words, but another detail suddenly caught her attention. Tiny pencil marks, so faint they were almost invisible. She carried the picture toward the window. The marks formed what looked like measurements. 3 inches, 5 inches, an arrow, and one abbreviation, WW. Margaret narrowed her eyes. "That's not Charles's handwriting. No, it looks more like a carpenter's note." Evelyn immediately remembered the coordinates carved beneath the stone bench back in Brookline. Measurements, coordinates, frames. Charles had been building a trail instead of leaving direct answers. Her phone rang. "Marcus." "I hoped you'd call," she said. "I need you to answer one question. I'm listening." "Did Charles ever work with someone whose initials were WW?" Marcus thought for several seconds. "Not professionally. But there was a craftsman." "What kind?" "A furniture restorer. He repaired antique frames, cabinets, and historical woodwork." Evelyn's pulse quickened. "What was his name?" "Walter Whitcomb. Is he still alive?" "As far as I know." "Where does he live?" Marcus hesitated. "About 15 minutes from Sanctuary House. Walter Whitcomb's workshop sat beside an old mill just outside Ashcroft. The modest building smelled of fresh-cut walnut and linseed oil. Rows of antique picture frames lined the walls. Some were unfinished. Others gleamed beneath fresh varnish. A small brass bell rang as Evelyn and Margaret entered. An elderly man looked up from a workbench. His hands were stained with decades of careful craftsmanship. Afternoon. Then he noticed Evelyn. His expression changed instantly. My goodness, he removed his glasses. "You have Charles's eyes," Evelyn smiled sadly. "I'm Evelyn Carter." Walter nodded slowly. "I've waited a long time to meet you." She exchanged a quick glance with Margaret. "You knew I would come?" "I hoped." Walter carefully covered the frame he had been restoring. "I just didn't know when." Evelyn removed the torn photograph from her handbag. "I found this." Walter barely looked at the image before recognizing it. "They took it. You've seen it before. I built its frame." Every word increased Evelyn's heartbeat. Walter motioned toward a small office. "Come inside." The room was simple. 1 desk, 2 chairs, shelves overflowing with woodworking journals. Walter sat carefully before speaking. "About 12 years ago, Charles brought me an old photograph. He asked for something unusual." "What?" "He wanted the frame built with a hidden compartment." Margaret inhaled sharply. Walter nodded. "It wasn't difficult. I've built secret drawers for antique collectors before." "What did he hide inside?" Walter shook his head. "I never asked. And he never told me." "Did anyone else know?" "No." Walter looked directly at Evelyn. "Charles trusted very few people. But he trusted you." Walter smiled. "He trusted my silence." Evelyn placed the torn photograph on the desk. "The frame has been stolen." Walter frowned deeply, so he was right. "Right about what?" Walter stood and walked toward an old filing cabinet. From one drawer he removed a worn ledger. Every commission had been recorded by hand. He opened it to an entry dated 12 years earlier. There it was. Client Charles Carter, custom walnut frame, hidden rear compartment. 1 duplicate key retained by client. Walter traced the final line with 1 finger. Charles insisted on adding this. He turned the ledger toward Evelyn. Written beneath the order appeared another note. "If anyone besides Evelyn requests repairs, refuse immediately." Walter looked genuinely troubled. "About 3 weeks ago," Evelyn leaned forward. "Someone came, a man, dark hair, expensive suit. He offered me $10,000 to build another hidden compartment exactly like Charles's. Daniel." Evelyn didn't say the name aloud. She didn't have to. Walter continued. "I refused." "What happened?" He became angry. "He showed me half of a photograph." Evelyn's heart pounded. "Half?" Walter nodded. "The missing half." He wanted to know what Charles had hidden. Walter walked toward the window. "I told him I had never seen inside the compartment." "Was he alone?" "No. There was another man waiting outside." Margaret frowned. "The black SUV." Walter looked surprised. "You've seen it too?" "We were followed." Walter became very quiet. Then he returned to the ledger. "I remembered something after he left." He flipped several pages toward the back. I had made a sketch while building the frame. He removed a folded sheet tucked inside the ledger. I forgot it was still here. Evelyn unfolded the drawing. It showed the back of the custom frame in remarkable detail. One corner contained a concealed sliding panel no larger than a matchbox. Inside it, according to Walter's handwritten notes, there was room for only one object, not documents, not photographs, something much smaller. Walter adjusted his glasses. I'd almost forgotten. What? The compartment wasn't designed for paper. He pointed toward the tiny space in the sketch. It was built to hold a single brass key. Silence filled the workshop. Evelyn slowly reached into her handbag. Then she removed the old iron key Charles had left her. Walter stared at it. He shook his head. No, that's not the key Charles described. He pointed once more at the sketch. The hidden compartment held a second key. The second key was found exactly where Walter believed Charles had intended it to be. With a court-approved inventory ordered after Evelyn's attorney filed an emergency petition to preserve every remaining item connected to Richard Carter's estate, the restored frame was finally recovered from a private storage locker rented under Daniel's company. The hidden compartment was still intact. Inside rested a tiny brass key wrapped in waxed paper, untouched for years because Daniel had never discovered where to slide the concealed panel. The brass key fit a small oak cabinet built into the library wall at Sanctuary House. Everyone who needed to witness the opening was present. Evelyn, Margaret, Marcus, Walter, their attorney, the estate's independent representative. Daniel stood several feet away beside his own lawyer, unable to interfere but forced to watch. The cabinet opened with a quiet click. There was no fortune inside. No stacks of cash, no diamonds. Only a leather portfolio, another sealed letter, several notarized property records, and a leather-bound journal written during Richard's final years. Evelyn opened the letter first. Richard's handwriting was unmistakable. He admitted that he had discovered Daniel had begun manipulating financial records long before his illness became serious. Rather than confront him immediately, Richard had quietly transferred Sanctuary House into a protected preservation trust that could never be sold for personal profit. Only Evelyn could choose its future after his death. Then came the sentence that made her hands tremble. I failed to protect you while I was alive. This is the only way I know how to keep them from taking your home after I'm gone. For a long moment, Evelyn couldn't speak. She had spent months believing Richard's silence had been abandonment. Now she understood something far more painful. He had seen the danger too late. The journal filled in the rest. Richard described his growing confusion as his health declined. He wrote about arguments with Daniel, secret meetings with attorneys, and his fear that every open confrontation only accelerated Daniel's plans. He also confessed his greatest regret. He had allowed Evelyn to carry humiliation alone because he believed he still had time to fix everything. He had been wrong. Daniel's attorney reviewed every document carefully. None could be challenged easily. Each transfer had been witnessed. Each signature had been independently notarized. The Preservation Trust had been created years before Richard's death and complied with state requirements. The estate representative quietly announced that Daniel's claims over Sanctuary House had no legal basis. The attempted sale was permanently void. A separate civil investigation into diverted estate funds continued, supported by financial records Marcus had preserved and banking documents obtained through discovery. Months later, Daniel agreed to a substantial financial settlement rather than face a lengthy public trial that threatened both his business and reputation. He resigned from every charitable board on which he served, and several professional partnerships quietly disappeared. No dramatic arrest followed. Life rarely worked that way. Instead, he lost something he had spent decades building: trust. The other stepchildren faced their own choices. Some admitted they had believed Daniel's version because it had been easier than asking difficult questions. They apologized to Evelyn, but she did not pretend everything had healed overnight. She accepted sincere words. She did not erase history. Margaret remained beside her through every legal meeting until the final paperwork was complete. When everything finally ended, she smiled and asked, "So, what happens to Sanctuary House now?" Everyone expected Evelyn to move back in. She surprised them. "I don't want another mansion." She looked through the library windows toward the gardens Charles had once loved. I want this place to become exactly what Richard hoped. Several months later, Sanctuary House reopened under a new purpose. Not as a private estate. As a quiet residence and retreat for elderly women rebuilding their lives after financial abuse, family abandonment, or sudden loss. Lawyers volunteered monthly workshops, counselors donated time. Local volunteers restored the gardens Charles had cherished decades earlier. The house no longer belonged to one family, it belonged to hope. Walter rebuilt the broken picture frame and returned the restored photograph to its place above the fireplace. This time nothing was hidden behind it, nothing needed to be. One autumn afternoon, Evelyn sat alone on the back porch with Richard's final journal resting on her lap. She no longer searched its pages for answers. She already had them. Love had not erased his mistakes. His mistakes had not erased his love. Both truths could exist together. She closed the journal gently and watched golden leaves drift across the lawn where fear had once ruled every decision. For the first time in many years, she felt something richer than victory. She felt free. If this story touched your heart, share what you think Evelyn's greatest act of courage was. We'd love to read your thoughts, and we hope you'll join us again for another unforgettable story.